My parents suddenly came back into my life when someone lied to them that I had married my rich boss. So I played along and taught them a lesson. I'm 27. I work as a financial consultant for a large company. I haven't spoken to my parents in 8 years. I have an older sister, Celeste, who is 34. She's happily married and raising 2 children. We talk occasionally, but she wouldn't call us close sisters. When I was 19, an incident occurred that made me cut off all contact with my parents forever. The thing is, my parents are devout Catholics, and they take their faith extremely seriously. From childhood, my sister and I were expected to strictly follow religious canons and live a life entirely based on these values. Instead of sending us to regular schools, they decided to homeschool us. In their opinion, the local schools didn't align with their views, so they took our education into their own hands. My parents had a clear picture of our future and exerted immense pressure on us to choose one of 2 paths: either become mothers to a large family or join a convent. In their view, only these options were consistent with the traditions of their community and were acceptable for us. My sister, who is 7 years older than me, never dated, lived at home until her wedding, rarely traveled more than 15 kilometers from our neighborhood, and barely participated in the local community life. It's no surprise she was their favorite. When she was 22, my parents arranged her marriage to Matthew, the son of a friend of my father's. At the wedding, they nitpicked everything, from the scripture readings to the order of the Mass, even though it was conducted by an ordained priest. Fortunately for my sister, Matthew turned out to be a great guy, and Celeste has a good life and wonderful children. Seeing my sister get married off at such a young age, I realized I wanted a different life for myself. She might have been fine with it, but I wasn't going to follow the traditional path. I was a young woman full of dreams, ambitions, and a passion for independence. I wanted to build a career, travel, and see the world. My vision for life was in direct conflict with what my parents thought was right. After finishing school, I desperately wanted to go to university. Despite their categorical no, I applied to one of the best colleges in our county and was thrilled when I received a full scholarship. But when I told my parents about it, they were furious. My father threw a tantrum. He screamed. His words were full of condemnation and disappointment. My mother simply refused to look at me. They couldn't understand why I needed an education. In their view, I was supposed to focus on following the plan they had laid out. It was a difficult moment, seeing the people closest to me reject my dream of education with such fury. The consequences of that argument were severe. It marked the beginning of an ever-widening gap between me and my parents for years to come. It was obvious that my dreams were completely at odds with their idea of what my life should be. This moment became the starting point of our complete estrangement. Going to college opened up a whole new world for me. I learned things that challenged the beliefs instilled in me since childhood. I made new friends and experienced a level of independence I had never felt before. But my parents struggled to cope with these changes. They perceived my independence and the influence of college as a threat to their values. Every visit during the holidays was tense and filled with misunderstanding. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, avoiding any topic that could lead to another fight. The chasm between our views only grew, and it became increasingly difficult to find common ground. Despite all this, a part of me still craved their approval, but it remained an unattainable dream. After graduating from college, I was excited about the prospect of finding a job. I told my parents about my desire to build a career and soon move out of their house to follow my dreams. But they were unhappy. They didn't want me to go down that path. They continued to insist that I get married and have children, in complete accordance with their beliefs. Our arguments became more and more fierce. Emotions ran high, and they desperately tried to persuade me to reconsider my decisions. When I refused to comply, they told me to leave their house immediately. I was stunned and shocked at how sharply and viciously they reacted to a decision that had brought me so much joy. I packed my things and moved in with my sister, where I lived for a few months until I found my own place. It was then that I made a promise to myself never to return to my parents' house again. I wanted to live by my own rules and achieve success and happiness outside the confines of their traditional Expectations. My decision to leave and build a career deeply hurt my parents. In response, they completely cut off all communication with me. Since then, whenever I spoke with my sister, I made a point not to ask about our parents, and she never mentioned them to me either. Now, let's get to the story itself. I had been dating my boyfriend for 3 years, and 3 months ago he proposed. We decided to have a simple civil ceremony at the registry office, followed by a modest dinner with close friends. I'm not a fan of lavish, pretentious weddings, and the fact that I couldn't invite my family was another reason to keep things as simple as possible. Everything in my life seemed to be going smoothly until I received a call from an unknown number. I answered, and on the other end were my parents. After so many years of silence, I couldn't believe it was them. It turned out they had heard about my wedding and wanted to congratulate me. I thanked them reservedly, but inside, emotions were raging. They continued to ask how I was doing, and I answered without much enthusiasm. Everything was fine until they started asking what it was like to be married to someone holding such a high position in my company. Puzzled, I asked them what they meant, and then they joyfully explained that they were happy I had married my boss. My jaw almost dropped. I couldn't understand where they got such an idea. They said that one of their acquaintances had told them about it, and they were very happy for me. I was mostly silent while they chattered on about how proud they were of me for finally getting married. My father was thrilled at the idea of meeting my husband and getting to know him better. My mother immediately asked if I was going to quit my job now to focus on children and my husband's happiness. Their suggestions stunned me. Gradually, it dawned on me that the only reason they had suddenly decided to get in touch after 8 years was their belief that I had married my boss, which in their eyes elevated my social status. And now they expected me to become a model wife. Their patronizing tone and expectations enraged me, but I decided to play along. I painted them a picture of a life that was partly true. My husband and I do have a comfortable life, but I added a bunch of lies. Supposedly, we have 20 maids, a huge mansion with a pool, and so on. My parents eagerly absorbed every word, and their excitement only grew, especially when they started begging me to arrange a meeting with my rich husband. Their enthusiasm was just pathetic, as their entire desire to reconnect with me was based solely on the lie that I had married my boss. As I played along and agreed to arrange a meeting for the weekend, a plan began to form in my mind. I wanted to teach them a lesson, to make them realize the pain they had caused by rejecting me just because I didn't meet their expectations. And now they were suddenly eager to come back into my life, but only to show off to their friends from the parish. It was bitter, and I was determined to show them the consequences of their actions. I talked to my husband about my plan, but he was hesitant. He understood why I had lied, but he doubted whether it was a good idea to start our acquaintance with my parents with a deception. After all, this was their first meeting. After some persuasion, he finally agreed to participate in this performance. I also reached out to my boss. Yes, my boss was a woman. Over the years I had worked at the company, we had become good friends. I explained the situation to her, and she was very amused by what was happening with my parents. I asked if I could use her house for a day, and she readily agreed. I sent my parents the address and set up the meeting they had asked for. On the day of the meeting, my parents arrived at the house, confident that they were about to meet my rich boss, whom I had supposedly married. Their eyes widened in amazement when they saw the size of the house and the huge lawn. My husband and I met them at the entrance. My father shook my husband's hand with such energy it was as if he wanted to tear it off. My mother hugged me and congratulated me on my marriage. Although my husband was initially hesitant, he played his part flawlessly. He greeted my parents with a smile, started some small talk, and pretended to be the rich boss they had mistaken him for. We sat down at the table, and my parents immediately noticed the staff serving us food. My father started bombarding my husband with questions about the house, his assets, and how I managed to land a man of his level. Despite being annoyed by this whole interrogative atmosphere, my husband, to maintain the image, concocted a whole fairy tale about his wealth, career path, and how we met. This was all part of our carefully crafted game. In the middle of the conversation, my father, unable to contain himself, leaned forward with a glint in his eye and asked, "You know, I've always dreamed of seeing a classic car collection. Do you happen to have a couple of vintage cars we could look at?" My husband played along and said yes, he had a few. And the two of them went off to inspect my rich husband's car collection, which actually belonged to my boss. Meanwhile, my mother stayed inside, came over to me, and lowering her voice, confessed, "You know, we're so glad you married a rich man, because we're having trouble paying our mortgage," she said with anxiety. "We're afraid we might lose the house." I froze, staring at her in complete astonishment. And she continued, "Since you're now married to a rich husband, living in a mansion with vintage cars and a bunch of servants, you could easily persuade him to help us with the payments." It hit me like a ton of bricks. The only reason my parents decided to contact me after all these years was their hope of taking advantage of my husband's wealth. They never cared about me. It was a harsh realization, and a storm of emotions churned inside me as I waited for my father and husband to return. The tension hung in the air. When they finally came back, I took a deep breath and decided, it's time for a frank conversation. I turned to my father and asked directly, "Is what Mom said true?" He hesitated for a moment, then replied, "Well, to be honest, I didn't expect you to get married at all, let alone to a rich man. And now that your husband has everything, it wouldn't hurt if he shared a little of it with us." My husband and I were shocked by these words. My father continued, explaining that he really didn't have the money for the mortgage, and he couldn't ask friends for help. It would hurt his reputation. Seeing my parents' desperation and their conviction that they could easily benefit from my husband's supposed wealth, I decided to see my revenge through to the end. With a mischievous glint in my eye, I looked at my father and said, "You know what, Dad? We can help you with the mortgage, but there's one condition. You have to publicly apologize to me first and admit that you were wrong to cut me off 8 years ago. And you have to do it in front of the whole family and friends at a gathering we'll organize." My parents were taken aback, but they didn't really have a choice. They reluctantly agreed to my terms. Over the next few weeks, I arranged a family gathering, inviting relatives and close friends. My sister didn't know the full circumstances and was completely bewildered as to why our parents had suddenly decided to get in touch with me. After so many years, I deliberately didn't let her in on my revenge plan, as I knew her moral principles might take over, and she might spill the beans to our parents. On the day of the event, it was nice to see my extended family after so many years and to meet my parents' old friends. Everyone was congratulating me on my marriage to my supposed rich boss and kept asking when we were going to have children. Their narrow-minded questions were starting to annoy me, but to keep up appearances, I smiled politely and answered everything without complaint. Amidst the general excitement, my father decided to get everyone's attention to make a toast. He stood up, raised his glass, and began by saying how happy he was to be among family and friends. He congratulated my husband and me on our marriage. Then my father continued his speech, expressing pride in how I had supposedly changed my life by marrying my boss. He spoke about how ashamed he had been when I announced my desire to have a career, and how, in his opinion, I had disgraced the family back then. In conclusion, he announced that he now forgives me, as I had finally chosen the path that he and my mother had always dreamed of for me. A silence fell over the room. His words hung in the air, and my father had no idea that the evening was about to take a very different turn, one he was clearly not prepared for. When he finished his speech, there was a respectful, tense pause in the room. Most of the guests were sure that I would stand up to thank him, but I had very different intentions. The time had come to reveal the true purpose of this event and finally speak out about the 8-year rift. As all eyes turned to me, I began to speak. "Thank you, Dad, for your kind words and for being here today, but I have something to confess." A whisper ran through the room. "Yes, I am married," I continued, "but he is not my boss. My boss is a woman, and by the way, a very close friend of mine. It was her house you saw earlier. All that wealth, the luxurious life, it was all a setup. Someone lied to you, saying I married my boss, and I decided to play along to find out what you really wanted from me. That's why I insisted on this meeting today, to tell the truth about our family. The expression on my father's face changed from proud to stunned. A dead silence fell over the room. I told everyone, right in front of them, how my parents had cut me off for 8 years just because they didn't like my desire for independence and a career. But suddenly, as soon as they believed I had supposedly married a boss with a lot of money, they called right away. I revealed the real reason for their call. They needed financial help because they couldn't pay for their house. They got in touch after all these years with only one goal: to leech off my rich husband and convince me to ask him to pay their debts. It was a shocking confession. As everyone processed what they had heard, I continued. Although I didn't marry my boss as they thought, my husband and I do have a very comfortable life, and we both have well-paying jobs. I emphasize that this prosperity is the result of me breaking free from my parents' control and following my own path, choosing a career instead of a hasty marriage and motherhood. The room was filled with mixed emotions, from surprise and disbelief to understanding and even disappointment. All eyes turned to my parents, who now looked humiliated and exposed. The guests began to look at each other and whisper as my husband and I stood up from the table and left the house with a sense of accomplishment. I felt a sense of satisfaction. I had finally put an end to the facade that my parents had been maintaining in front of their community for so long. All of this happened last week, and the consequences have been quite telling. Since then, many people have been calling me. Most are supportive and admire my courage for standing up for myself and speaking the truth in front of everyone. But my sister and some relatives think I went too far by publicly humiliating my parents. So I did a bad thing by playing along with their lie about being married to my boss just to get my final revenge. So I suggest you pause this video right now and answer the author's question in the comments. Personally, I won't judge whether the author did the right thing or not, but she certainly had the right to do so. Yes, she publicly humiliated her parents in front of their community, but for a moment, let's remember that her parents had also humiliated her in front of everyone they knew. In fact, her parents publicly humiliated her in front of the very same community, even at the very same party. So, I believe the author is absolutely not at fault here. And now, let's move on to the update. Update 1. Thank you all for your feedback on my post. After reading your comments and advice, I felt like calling my sister and sharing my point of view. I explained to her that I was only 19 when my parents kicked me out of the house, and how that trauma left deep emotional scars for years. Their decision to cut me off was based solely on my desire to get a higher education and live differently from how they wanted. It was incredibly painful. I made it clear that I never judged her for choosing marriage. It just wasn't my path. I told her how hurt I was when I realized the real reason my parents wanted to contact me after so many years. I asked Celeste a question. Could she ever do the same to her own children, turn her back on them if they made the wrong choice? She answered seriously. No, I pointed out to her that as a mother, she should understand how terrible what our parents did to me was. That's why I felt the need to teach them a lesson they wouldn't forget. After she heard my side of the story, my sister expressed sympathy for what I had to go through. I had always kept my feelings to myself, and she never realized the full extent of my internal conflict. Celeste admitted that she had no idea how difficult it had been for me all these years. Now she understood why I did what I did. Although she can't fully condone my revenge, she promised not to hold it against me. After that conversation, I felt better. As for my parents, they haven't contacted me since, and I had no intention of making the first move. Considering how harshly I exposed them, I can only imagine how angry they are right now. Time will tell if they will reflect on their actions and want to mend our broken relationship, or if they will just continue to blame me for everything. For now, I'm sticking to my guns. I did what I thought was right, and I hope they've finally learned their lesson. Today, my mom called me while I was at work. She said that she and my father feel humiliated in front of everyone and that my father is still angry with me. She continued to reproach me for lying, but I reminded her that I only played along to expose their true intentions. My mom tried to justify herself, saying they really believed I was finally going to be a good girl, give up my career, and devote myself to my family. I made it clear that I had no intention of doing that, especially now that I'm financially stable and up for a promotion. I stressed again that I regret nothing, as all of this only revealed the true nature of my parents. My mom also told me that some of our relatives and friends are now discussing the situation. Some have told them directly that what they did to me 8 years ago was terrible. This, according to her, made my father even more furious. I didn't want to continue this conversation because I knew it would lead nowhere, so I just hung up. I really didn't want to have this fruitless dialogue in the middle of my workday. My parents are stuck in their beliefs, and I'm stuck in mine. But I was pleased that thanks to my confession, the ice had been broken not only within our family but also in the circle of everyone who was aware of what was happening. Update 2. It's been 3 months since the last update, and a lot has changed. In that time, heeding the advice of many of you, I decided to start therapy. I realized that all these years, I had been dealing with my parents' estrangement incorrectly, and the old resentment was a heavy burden. Yes, I had exposed the truth about my parents' motives, but I didn't want to continue living, clinging to that resentment. Therapy became a step towards a healthier way of processing the past and my own feelings. My parents agreed to sit down at the negotiating table, mainly thanks to my sister's sincere requests. At first, I was hesitant to agree to this, but my husband convinced me to give them a chance. We all gathered at my sister's house, and I chose to remain silent until my parents started the conversation first. My mom spoke first, expressing regret for all our past clashes, which really surprised me. She admitted that she had rethought a lot during this time and realized how much their actions had hurt me. Now she understands the pain they caused me. My father, who had been silent until then, admitted that cutting off communication for 8 years was a mistake and that they want to fix everything. He explained that their commitment to their beliefs prevented them from seeing the situation from my side. I mostly listened rather than talked. Their words sounded sincere, and it was a positive start to the conversation. My parents said they had sought advice from people in their community, and this helped them to see everything in a new light. Although it wasn't easy, I understood that this was the first step towards some kind of reconciliation. My sister was clearly relieved at how the conversation was going. She said almost nothing but was there supporting us. You could see how much she hoped for the relationship between me and my parents to be restored. Seeing her optimism was encouraging. Maybe, with time and our efforts, our family will really be able to heal and reconnect. I will continue to go to therapy and remain open to a possible reconciliation with my parents, but I will approach it with caution. For those who are interested, my husband and I are doing great. Our marriage brings only joy, and he always supports my decisions. I'm really lucky with my partner. We're not thinking about children yet, but we're not ruling out the possibility in the future. For now, we're just enjoying life and traveling the world together. Well, that's all. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Watch our previous video, which you'll see right here, and good luck to you.